Welcome to LinkedIn Live from Ipsos. I'm James Conrad, President and Head of the Experience Group here at Ipsos. And I'm joined today by an esteemed panel. Henrik Christensen from Albertsons, Senior Director of Customer and Market Intelligence, Christine Dworkin from Ipsos, Vice President in the Experience Group, and John Birchler. He's the Executive Vice President of Ipsos Public Affairs. We are here today to talk about what to expect. I was thinking this morning, it's almost like expectations are changing rapidly, and really since COVID, it's been nonstop change. So expectations are changing rapidly in the marketplace, and we're here today to talk about the implications of that, the impacts of what's happening in the United States and beyond. And we're going to be pulling from our Know the New America series that we've been doing now for the past several months, as well as layering in some analysis and data from our experience practice as well. So let's kick things off with John to talk about the Know the New America and what's happening with citizen expectations.
Yeah, well, thanks so much, James. It's great to be with you all, especially on such an important topic that has shaped a lot of events this year, as we're all very well aware of. And I think it's important to think about customer experience also from the lens of citizen experience. So CX and CX, right? Our customers that are actively shopping at Albertsons, for example, are also accessing government services. So how do we understand that same customer throughout the entire journey of accessing citizen and social services and the programs and products in the private sector? So one of the most important things we've seen is that major themes have really emerged from our understanding of the new America. Words matter more than ever, now more than ever, of course. America is not a binary, our customers are not a binary group. We're very nuanced, right? And it's important to kind of think about how we understand our people just as it is our customers actively shopping for our products. And when we think about the distillation of terms, there's a lot of words that have become more inflammatory over the last couple of years. But as we looked and did a broad analysis of our polling data, our public opinion data, as well as our research panel data, two terms really stuck out to us that are broadly appealing to all Americans, regardless of party affiliation. And it's freedom, which sounds kind of corny. It's freedom and fairness. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. And I think it'll be good for, y'all to consider that as well. Fairness in the sense that everyone wants to be treated equally under the law, but also equally in the eyes of one another. And freedom in the sense is I want the freedom to make my own choices about the products that I buy, the services that I access, or the decisions I make about who I'm going to vote for, which is obviously quite important too and impacts the rest of it. So those nuances really help us really better further define what the new America is from the customer experience lens. And when I think about it from a former government leader and somebody who led one of the largest CX and employee experience practices in the federal government at the Department of Veterans Affairs, I see really three key things on how the new America approaches customer experience. And I think that the private sector has a heavy influence on that. Number one is that this government in particular wants to drive efficiencies in the way that social services and government services are accessed. That's obviously what the private sector wants every day and what we drive toward in helping them improve those experiences. The second is more along the lines of driving cost savings, obviously, because we've seen the reduction in government employees and government contracts. So how can we get to better efficiency there? And the third is really mirroring government services in the way that I interact with my state, federal, or local government, and with mirroring the private sector and how that looks and feels if I'm shopping at Albertsons or if I'm shopping online on Amazon or something to that effect. Like I want that look and feel to be the same. So it's really interesting to think about those three things from a customer experience in the new America and how politically these objectives kind of filter down into the experience practice writ large. And especially because, and if you haven't seen the news recently, President Trump has appointed a chief design officer for the federal government, and to work at the Department of Government Efficiency, which is formerly the United States Digital Services, that has been actively pursuing better digital and access and better customer experience, better user experience for the federal government for many years. And I think this levels up in a lot of ways. And it'll be interesting to see what this new chief design officer brings and what direction it drives toward improving government services and the access of government services. So it'll be interesting to follow along on this journey altogether. So those are kind of our cursory thoughts on this, distilling the data and making it consumable for our partners.
Yeah, really interesting. Freedom and fairness. I love it. So, Henrik, as we think about the companies that you've worked with over the years, and you've done a lot in your career, how do you think about citizen expectations and how that applies to the industries and sectors that you worked with?
A couple of things come to mind, James, in the customer experience of how expectations are changing. There is a greater need for efficiency in the shopper experience. So shoppers want as many tools as they can get to help them plan their shopping trips and also experience their shopping trip when they are in store or online trying to find what they're looking for, and on through the checkout experience. The easier we can make those experiences, the more likely it is that the customer will return again and again.
I can relate.
And the second thing I would mention is it's no secret that grocery prices and many other prices have risen. There is now a greater need for cost savings, and to make more savings available is where it starts, but also to make it easy to find those savings and to understand what the deal is. The third thing I'll mention is tools in case there is the need for communication between the consumer and the business. Will I be able to make my thoughts known?
Yes.
Can I find someone that will take action that I may need because something happened in my transaction?
Yeah, feedback's definitely important, and the ability to communicate with brands. Christine, as we think about it from an experience group perspective, how do some of these points relate to some of the things that you see?
Yeah, I think a lot of what Henrik just said, that freedom and fairness being present throughout any type of interaction is really important. So freedom in the terms of having products and services that people can choose that meet their needs, right? Tailored to the needs of the individual and not the monolith of customers as we think we might understand them. So that really comes down to choice and understanding needs and understanding that needs are evolving. And then fairness in terms of feeling like you got what you paid for when you do make that choice. So it is about value. It is certainly about price, but it's also about service as well, that finding support when you need it, the way you prefer to have it. Again, a company anticipating what your need might be and making sure that it's met.
Yeah, really important. So, John, what are some key takeaways from knowing the new America from a sort of citizen expectation perspective that you think are important for our audience to think about?
Yeah, for brands, whether that's government or private sector, I think it's important for all brands to consider testing messages in this new America, in this new environment, and whether that's testing your product campaigns with a group of panelists or your chosen customers, they're your net promoters, so to speak. Going out to them and asking for feedback consistently. I also think that making sure that we're being bold in some of our ad testing too, which I know Ipsos is a market leader on, because if you think about freedom and fairness in context, right, how can you apply that lens to appeal more broadly with those terms to all Americans, regardless of that party affiliation? So you're not shutting people out, and you're not closing the door. And then, finally, I'd say voice of the customer, right? It's always the customer is always at the center, whether they're a citizen or whether they're a customer accessing private sector products and services. So better align those listening posts. In the military, we call them listening posts, observation posts. Better align your LPOPs to understand the voice of the customer in this new America, and look at those terms that resonate most in the buying journey, in the shopping journey, or in the citizen social services journey, so that you can then tweak the way that that they're presented.
Interesting. Christine, do you want to talk a little bit more about some of the data that we've seen as we think about expectations and meeting those expectations and what we've been seeing and you've been seeing in the experience group and how to approach that?
Yes, yeah. So just like John, we have this wealth of data.
Yeah.
But when we start to look through it, we start to see a lot of themes really emerge. So, we talked to more than 4,000 U.S. consumers fairly recently, and a lot of that work was about that idea of expectations. How they're met, when they're met, what happens when they aren't met. So really, I think what we learned is what happens when expectations are not only met but exceeded. So among those 4,000 Americans that we heard from, about half of them said, in a recent experience with a wide cross-section of brands from different industries, that when they reflect on what happened, it was nothing notable. It wasn't remarkable one way or another. And maybe that's right, moving through your day as expected. Yeah. Maybe it's intended to be not notable. We had 20% tell us something went wrong and they had to follow up in some way. Those people said it was when, something was not reliable, something was not transparent about what they were expecting to have happened, or when they reached out for service and that experience created greater frustration. But that's only 1 in 5.
Yeah.
So really, that I would say is probably pretty good in the grand scheme of things. But the remainder told us when they thought about their recent experience with, again, a broad cross-section of brands, something happened that delighted them to the point that their expectations were exceeded. So this is, again, you have to understand what an individual wants and needs in that moment to understand how to not only meet where their expectations are, but anticipate what might come next. So I'll share a story that, last week my dog wasn't feeling well. We took him to the vet. Yesterday I got a call from our vet asking how he was doing, making sure the medication she had prescribed was the right dosage, and asking if I had any questions. And I did have questions. I wasn't expecting that phone call. I wasn't expecting her to care about my pet as much as I did. It really, it did something to make me think about, I can really trust this person to take care of a beloved member of my family. It really just, again, exceeded any expectations I had for that type of interaction. So we know in the CX world that we have a framework for kind of understanding what that connection starts to look like. And we at Ipsos measure something called emotional attachment. So when you have an interaction and it goes to plan, right, you're functionally satisfied with what went right. You think the brand is reliable, you think it met your basic needs, you think that brand did things about as well as maybe one of their competitors would. And that's important, right? You have to deliver on those promises. Yeah, exactly. It's the point of entry. That's why they probably came to you in the first place. But when we're talking about exceeding, elevating, we're talking about building an emotional connection, and that's where you start to build trust, that you start to get that person to really think about choosing you more often. And a component of that framework is about being willing to forgive when things go wrong. So that's really where, again, they understand you have good intentions, you have the customer at heart, but you won't always get it right, and they understand that they'll be willing to give you another chance to try it. So what we see when we talk about, if an experience phoned it in and did what you barely needed it to, was below your expectations, or better yet, exceeded, is we see that convergence of emotional attachment is created in that moment when you're exceeding those expectations. What that does is give you, great customer lifetime value, right? They're going to recommend you to others. They're going to choose you when they can. They're going to spend more with you, right? There's a lot of value in creating that emotional attachment. When we look at that by industry, we see that supermarkets are really able to do that, I think, to what Henrik was saying before. So I'll be curious, Henrik, to know, what's unique about a supermarket and how you can build an emotional connection with your customers.
Sure, Christine. I think what's unique is that supermarkets are woven into their communities. Yeah. The employees often live nearby and also shop at the store. And the grocery stores tend to invest in community events. And most customers shop fairly frequently for groceries, generally at least once a week, but many several times a week or even once a day. So when you go to the same store over again, you get to know people by name. And in my own case, I've gotten to know at my favorite grocery store one of the cashiers. And so I talk with him about things like yard work. And it just fosters a personal bond where it kind of personifies the Brenner and the band through the associates. So that forges a connection. It's very important to be able to capture that and to harness that by putting listening posts out there where shoppers can tell the grocery store about their experiences, whether it's favorable or unfavorable. The more listening posts you put out there, the more you see that there is actually a very nice balance between, yeah, this was great versus here are some things that didn't go the way that I had expected that maybe you should work on. So giving those opportunities is super important, and then also with a promise to resolve it and making it right for the customer.
Absolutely. And I think of supermarkets too, how hyper personalized you make the experience that, when your receipt is printed out, there's a coupon for the things you buy most frequently, right? That you feel that they know you and they know your preferences by demonstrating that.
Can I say one more thing?
Absolutely.
So I also think that there is an opportunity that should not be missed. It's great that Ipsos puts information out that everyone can benefit from. And when I saw that information on the slide, it really told me that we shouldn't take shoppers for granted just because they're able to forgive us. That may work in the short term, but there's a risk in the long term. So you got to be able to diagnose what the top issues are that kind of go unreported, but that actually means something for the shopping experience. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that goes into what I'd like to talk about next, which is, again, that 20% of people who told us something went wrong. We see that when things go wrong, they tell us, actually, it's still not resolved. I think around 20% of those cases said, the issue I experienced hasn't been fully resolved to my satisfaction. We see no difference between supermarkets and other industries in that measure. But what we see for supermarkets is about 30% of the people say, oh, I didn't give that feedback. I didn't say something had not gone to plan. I kept it to myself. And it's because of that inherent, I know you'll get it right the next time, that we think that supermarkets really prevail in those encounters. But also we see that supermarkets are not impervious, right? You don't want to count on this phenomenon to happen, but we see that supermarkets are more likely than under other industries to continue to be chosen, for customers to say we're likely to continue. And I have to believe that's because of the feedback that's coming from the front line. You're engaging with someone in the moment that things are happening. You have the chance to resolve it by a human in the store as you're experiencing the issue. And it's taking those issues from what we call from problems to praise, that the employees have the chance to get it right in that moment. And they have the opportunity to deliver the experience that a customer would expect. So I think empowering your employees is hugely important, to trust them to do what's right and do what's in alignment with what a customer would expect for your brand.
No, it's a great point. It's got me thinking about something else. And John, you'll remember this. Several months ago, there was some data that I saw that talked about how institutions were eroding trust and reputation. And as we think about the new America and freedom and fairness and what's going on, we are seeing that some of the traditional bedrocks of our society are sort of losing reputation and credibility. But one of the things that struck me about that study was that brands have a role to play, and actually now I believe have a responsibility to maybe fill that void of credibility and reputation. And your story about that personal connection, being in the community, as I think about the role that you can play and other brands can play at really connecting with people to kind of build that emotional connection. Christine, you talked about it, just sort of hit me, because I do think we're in a golden age of brands right now, where there's probably more than there has been in decades, this opportunity to really be a thought leader, a trusted, part of our customers' lives like we've not really had before. I think there's a need for that, I think, in today's society. And it's a real opportunity, I think, for brands that can capitalize on that can understand what's going on in the minds of consumers and be able to play that part.
Yeah, with our alliteration, we talk about experience and expectations, but the third component of that is expression, right? The expression of the brand has to feel authentic.
Yeah.
We did a trust in government study in 2023, so it's a few years old. And we recently refreshed that data that looked at
Interesting.
public trust in federal institutions. To your point, is one of the major pieces of data that we've gleaned is that distrust in institutions, whether that's the courts, the executive, Congress, or their state and local government, whether they're garbage pickup, right? Which was really important to people at the tactical level, at the community level, to your point, Henrik. And so we're going to be releasing that quite soon. And I think what we're going to see is a slight dip in trust across different institutions that is reflective of that mood. And so how might we, progress from here? How might we rebuild that trust now that we're getting a better understanding of the priorities from this new administration, but also taking the private sector into account and managing that brand resilience across between government and private. So it's funny that the government writ large, the Office of Management and Budget that sets a lot of the CX prioritization and strategy across agencies, has reverted to trust as a measure, as one of the central measures. Because if citizens, the customers, same people, cannot trust the institutions that deliver these services, then they won't access. It's similar to brands. If they don't trust that brand, then they're less likely to access. They may have to because it's the only one down the street or proximity-wise, but trust does play a significant role in how citizens prioritize their choices in government and in private sector services. So excited to share that data very soon.
Well, I was thinking we could do another LinkedIn Live just on how brands can navigate that, because, there's sort of, there are pros and cons, and there's been some great examples and some not so great examples over the years. So maybe we'll do that in a future session. Henrik, I'd like to come back to you to talk about technology. There's been a lot of discussion. We are probably in another evolution on the technology side, and how technology is being used by companies to connect with customers, to help them understand and interact. What's your perspective, again, from the companies that you worked with over time, and how technology can be leveraged?
I see technology as a great enabler. When we think of voice of the customer, it really goes beyond just what a customer writes or says. But when you give customers an opportunity to show you a video, maybe, of what didn't go as well as it should have, and then the ability to do that real time, now it becomes very powerful to harness and organize all that unstructured customer data, and putting it in front of decision makers and stakeholders who have jurisdiction to take action and make it right. And so that data can be used to recognize associates that go to extra lengths to improve the customer experience, or conversely, when there are training opportunities too. So have that done real time, preferably within 24 hours, is absolutely key.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, and I would say, from what I know about your organization, that every organization has so much data, but the idea of having it all connected and being used for a purpose is really important, because it used to be the case that people didn't have as much measurement, but now it's probably the case that we have too much. So being organized about how you're listening is critical. So we actually, again, from the practitioner point of view, we have some data points about we do a study every year called Global Voices, where we talk to CX practitioners across the world about what they're thinking about in the year ahead. And last year, as in prior years, they told us a lot about making those omnichannel journeys more smooth, right? Making it easier for folks to interact with brands in the ways that they choose. But what we're starting to see is the role of technology being something that's an unknown, right? How technology can be used for better listening and better communication both ways with customers. But that's being done in different ways at different times, right? That technology is being the plane's being built as we fly it, so to speak. So I think, again, where that authenticity has to come in, right? If you're going to put a customer through to a chatbot when they're having an issue that requires service, make sure that chatbot is in the voice that they'd expect. Make sure there are personas available to meet that type of customer and have it more personalized.
Yeah. John, what about from a macro perspective, from a citizen's perspective, your thoughts on how technology is sort of influencing the space?
Yeah, just like we see in the private sector, personalization is becoming so much more important, especially when you think about uniting some of the journeys between different government agencies that deliver different services. For example, if the federal government knows when Americans are turning 65 and becoming Medicare eligible, well, that should trigger an alert to other agencies that have equities in that journey to proactively reach out to that individual and let them know what they need to do from a federal government standpoint, from the state government standpoint, to get registered and to have a more delightful journey, to use that term. It's not often that we get to use that term with government services, but I think we're trending better. But another good example is what we've seen in the private sector, where you can access different companies online or in a mobile app using your Google account or using LinkedIn in some cases, or ID.me as a single verification to instead of having to remember all of your passwords. The government's shifting to that as well. And so just recently, did my former agency shrink down from 4 login options, which is not a great user experience, not a great customer experience, to 2. And one of which is ID.me, which it's utilized across the private sector and public sector to log in securely, but also login.gov, which is a GSA, or General Services Administration product that the government built with that in mind, so that you can further unite those journeys. Kind of back to the point I made previously, from one agency to another, you have that single logon experience. So I think that increases trust. I think that increases the personalization and improves access in a lot of ways. But we've come a long way. We still have a long way to go. There's a lot that can be mirrored and learned from the private sector, and maybe even vice versa, because of the big investments that government's making in CX and employee experience too, which is just as important. Training and providing that nomenclature and those tools to be successful in delivering a world-class customer experience are just as important for our government employees. So we'll see. I think it's going to be interesting to see how it all, especially with this new chief design officer, where he takes this vision and improves those access to services.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if this cascades down to state level as well. I know, like, for example, the DMV always had such a bad rap for experience, but I was at a conference, you were there as well, we were in Las Vegas several months ago, and I was sitting at a table, I don't remember the gentleman's name, apologies if you're watching, but he worked at the DMV, and they were doing some amazing things to speed up the experience of getting your license, and even ways where you could go on like a mobile app and sort of get it. And I thought it was quite groundbreaking, and they're sort of trying to share that with other states as well. But it'll be interesting to see if states sort of pick up on what the federal government's doing here and start to think about, because a lot of things are at the state level as well that we interact with, right? To see whether it goes in that direction.
So several states have now hired chief experience officers.
Have they? Yeah.
So the federal government has a chief information officer and now a chief design officer.
Okay.
Several departments in the federal government had chief experience officers. I used to be one of them at VA, of course. But I think that is important, right? If you look at New York and their investment in CX, California, which is the DMV that you're probably referencing as the proud case study, they have really dramatically driven personalization and automation, to your point, which always contributes to customer trust.
Yeah, really interesting. Christine, some thoughts on sort of technology and maybe some key takeaways for the audience here that they should be thinking about.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, thinking about exceeding, right? That's difficult to do, and it's probably not a very sustainable plan to always be exceeding, but it's important to listen. I think John covered that a lot. It's important to get that feedback on a pretty regular basis to understand, are customers experiencing things as you design them to be, and to also be imaginative when you're mapping those journeys to understand, is there a logical end to this journey, or is there kind of a next step that a customer might not anticipate, like my experience with the vet? Is there something that we can do to move the needle a little bit further, and how do we programmatically and efficiently deliver that? Then obviously service, right? We have to think of, we think of feedback as a gift, right? We say that quite a lot in Ipsos. So what you can do when things have gone wrong, knowing that customers are willing to forgive you if they're assured that you're committed to getting it right for them, how we can empower those who are in the front lines and receiving that customer feedback to do the right thing, to think about, their empowerment and their flexibility to go out and recover that experience and make it a good one. So it's really important to pay attention to the ways that customers are reaching out to give you that feedback. And again, the omnichannel journey, to understand where they want to start and stop their journey, not where your app is forcing them to go, because it might not be their preference and it could contribute to their frustration. And that would lead to the third point, which is, again, just being authentic, having your brand voice be authentic. Like John said, words really do matter, and people want to be assured that they chose your brand for a reason, and they know who you are in their mind, and they want to see you showing up in that way. So again, listening, being authentic to your brand voice, and making sure that, when you do have all of this wonderful technology enabled, that it is in the voice of that brand that they would come to expect.
Yeah, good advice. So thanks everybody for attending. We're going to do some wrap up now and some final thoughts and summaries, and we have a Q&A as well. We did get some questions from the audience here. Henrik, do you want to take this one?
Sure.
I'll read the question. In what ways is Albertsons tailoring its services to meet individual customer needs, and how is this personalization impacting customer loyalty and trust?
Sure. So I'm not at liberty to discuss specifically how Albertsons conducts its business, but the way to address that is to strive for consistency across the omni-channel experience, so that it magnifies the importance of the technology that we give our customers. The second thing is to use technology for good, to first and foremost facilitate the shopping experience, to make it easy and effortless, frictionless, and to then delight customers with deals that they need and want. So you can also measure that through rigorous user design research, which is super important, because once you begin to design these instruments, you become very excited about it and you want to load all these features into them, but they always must accrue back to facilitating the shopping experience, making the experience easier.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. Another question then we'll take. In the world of empathy, how do you balance a drive for efficiency and technology with the potential of leaving a generation of those less tech savvy behind? And this resonates. I just spent a couple of weeks with my mother recently, and she was complaining about how challenging it was to navigate a couple different systems, and I could relate to her frustration. So
absolutely. That's why, I think, again, we heard practitioners say themselves that they're trying to understand this omnichannel journey, because where you start and where you end to get resolution is not often the same channel. It's not often the same interaction, right? We know it takes multiple interactions to do this, but you have to give customers choice.
Yeah.
If they prefer to speak to someone on the phone, don't frustrate them by, dangling that carrot further and further away from them. So, there'll be some people who prefer never to interact with a human and happy to go through a chat bot or an app or a website, but making a human available and again tailoring that experience to their preference is really important regardless of generation.
John's going to pick up on this, I'm sure, but it got me thinking also about fairness as you think about addressing the needs of those that aren't as tech savvy. But John, I'm sure you have some thoughts.
Yeah, it's an interesting project that we work on at Ipsos Public Affairs that is servicing the Defense Department, which is the largest employer in the world, the largest company in the world, technically, right? 8 carrier fleets, all right. But for all of their patient experience surveys for the military health system, it's a myriad of user personas. So we have the retiree population who are of the generation that particularly likes to pick up the phone and talk to somebody online, or they like to receive mail about their appointments or their care. And you have to design for that population and their spouses, their beneficiaries. Then you have 18 to 22-year-olds who they're serving their first enlistment term, who access information in completely different channels and in completely different ways. So how do we better reach these individuals, knowing that they're not going to answer their email maybe and receive a survey, but we've instituted text messaging which is a new thing for government survey delivery and collection. So I think that we're constantly iterating on how we reach these different personas and everyone in between in that omni-channel environment, noting the preferences and the personalization that we can design around after doing a lot of qualitative interviews and looking at a lot of other research data that's in the public or the private sector.
Yeah. So it sounds like choice, and again, this goes back to what we talked about earlier, understanding customer expectations, and they're not all the same. It's not a monolith, right? There are different segments within our customer base, and understanding that they want different things. And again, this is why research exists, to be able to answer some of these questions. We're starting to wind down, so I thought we could go around just a few key takeaways for the audience and things that they could be thinking about that you think are important. We've talked about a lot of important points today, but maybe some final thoughts. John, I'll start with you, and I'll come this way towards Henrik. Some final thoughts for the audience today as they think about the changing landscape and how, especially the U.S. is sort of going through a bit of a transformation at the moment, and the implications for brands, et cetera.
Yeah, think about the way you're messaging and the way you're communicating with your customers, and understanding their needs first and foremost, so that whether you're delivering a government service or campaign, public health awareness campaign or something to that effect, or you're trying to sell a product or an experience, think about deriving those insights. And between the experience practice, between the public affairs public opinion polling practices, we can distill that data down. And it's been really interesting to see those freedom and fairness resonate across all different types of Americans that want to access private and public services. So that's kind of how I would recommend that we walk away from this. And if you're wanting to get to better personalization, you want to on the front stage and wanting to drive better automation on the backstage, you got to continue to listen to your customer.
Yeah. Words matter is what I took away from you.
Absolutely.
Christine, some final thoughts for the audience.
I would say you said think about messaging. I would say think about measuring. That you have to think about, challenge what you think is going to happen, right? Shift your hypotheses, because those might be standing in the way of some truths. So I think it's really important to think of a North Star in measurement that's going to serve your organization's goals. Because, when people tell us what they're likely to do in the future, we don't know about that conversion, right? We don't know what changes between when they were likely and when they would actually take action. So I liked what John was saying about trust, right? Trust is probably becoming something that's really important to understand, and probably ladders up to a lot of behaviors we'd like to encourage. Thinking about, leading versus lagging metrics to make sure that you have a really solid framework for understanding customers that is going to move when they move, so that you're able to be a little bit more precise in understanding where things are shifting to understand why.
Okay, great advice. Henrik, some final thoughts from you?
I would just say to all practitioners, make sure to use wonderful and free of charge information and knowledge that Ipsos keeps putting out there. I thought what we saw today was very enlightening. Obviously, do your own research. And as John mentioned, it always comes down to consumer needs. What are those needs? What are the ones that you can address, your company as a practitioner? And then prioritize them, but don't think of customers as a monolith. Do think of them as in terms of personas that have nuances to how they want to address those needs. And then break down the barriers. Make the experience as easy and joyful as humanly possible.
Great advice. From my perspective, there's one thing that we talked a bit about, but I was inspired by your story. I think a reminder, we know this, the importance of the front line. And they're the ones that are spending time with our customers, and the opportunities there to build emotional connection, Christine, to your point, to understand expectations, John, to build relationships, to deliver experiences and exceed experiences, that they're such an important part of companies we work with and brands that we work with, and how we engage with that group is as if not more important than how we engage with customers, and ensuring that we're tuned in to and inspiring and engaging that group of folks within the team. That would be the one thing that sort of I'd like to reiterate for the audience. I know we all know this, but it's a good reminder. Okay, well, we're going to wrap on that note. I'd like to thank Henrik, Christine, and John for joining me today for this session on LinkedIn. I'd like to thank all of you for spending some of your Tuesday morning, and if you're on the West Coast, really early morning with us. If you're seeing this as a recording follow-up, thanks for taking the time. It's a really important topic. You'll hear more about it from us. We have the Know the New America series that John and his team are leading across the business. We know that it's an important time in our history. Things are changing. We can't rely on past playbooks all the time. We can't rest on our laurels. We do need to stay connected to what's happening in the landscape, what's happening with customers, what they're feeling, what they expect from us. Critically important as we sort of navigate through uncharted territory, I would say, over the last 6 years for all of us as we sort of figure out where to go. So thanks for taking time. Look for more things like this from Ipsos in the future, and have a great rest of the day.